So I want you to imagine the Vice President of the United States sitting across a polished negotiating table in Islamabad.
Right, okay.
And the stakes here are just, I mean, they're almost impossibly high. They're trying to broker a ceasefire to this massive multi-front regional war that has totally upended the global economy.
Yeah, the whole world is basically watching this one table.
Exactly. Now imagine that the man sitting across from the vice president, the guy who was effectively steering the entire geopolitical strategy for the opposing side was, just a few decades ago, bragging on a leaked audio recording about riding a motorcycle through university dormitories.
Beating college students with a wooden club.
Yes. Beating students with a club. I mean, you look at that trajectory and it actively defies any normal political logic, you know?
It really does. I mean, it totally shatters our conventional understanding of how leaders are made because, we tend to view statecraft through this very Western lens.
Right. We expect diplomats and policy degrees.
Exactly. We assume a high-level strategic leader has to emerge from think tanks or law schools or at least, standardized military academies. We look for this sanitized linear progression.
Which makes sense to us.
Right, but when you examine the architecture of power in authoritarian systems, especially in the Middle East, the currency of advancement is just entirely different. You aren't promoted for your diplomatic finesse. You're promoted for your utility.
And honestly, no one embodies that grim utility quite like the man we're investigating today.
No one.
If you've been tracking the incredibly intense geopolitical news over the last few months, or frankly, if you've just been watching the wild, almost whiplash-inducing swings in your own retirement accounts or the U.S. stock market, there is one specific individual at the epicenter of it all.
Yeah, he's the common denominator.
So today, we are conducting a comprehensive investigation into the biography of Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. Officially, he is the Speaker of Iran's parliament.
Right, that's the official title.
But in reality, in this current moment of April 2026, he is operating as Iran's de facto strategic leader.
And, to understand Ghalibaf is to really understand the actual unvarnished mechanics of how the Islamic Republic functions when its back is completely against the wall. He is essentially the ultimate stress test of their political system.
So to unpack this, we've pulled together an extensive stack of sources. We're looking at deep dive think tank reports from the Soufan Center, highly detailed analytical profiles from United Against Nuclear Iran, or UNI, and the Arab Center.
Some really dense material there.
Yeah, very detailed. And we're cross-referencing all of that with real-time geopolitical updates from Republic World and the Jerusalem Post, while grounding the whole timeline with historical context from Wikipedia.
Which is crucial for keeping the chronology straight.
Exactly. And our mission for you today in this deep dive is to deconstruct a massive paradox.
It's a huge contradiction.
It really is. I mean, we are looking at a brutal military enforcer who somehow rebranded as a modernizing technocrat.
Yeah.
A guy who survived multi-billion-dollar corruption scandals that would have, toppled governments anywhere else.
Oh, easily.
And a populist who preaches anti-Western austerity to his people while his own family buys luxury real estate abroad.
Yeah, the central question his biography poses is just fascinating. It forces us to ask, how does someone with such a publicly contradictory and frankly deeply compromised record manage to not just survive, but actually ascend to the absolute pinnacle of power during a national existential crisis?
It's wild. So let's start by looking at the crucible that formed him. Because, you don't become the regime's ultimate survivor without first proving you're willing to do the unthinkable.
Right.
Looking at his early background in the sources, he was born in 1961 in Torkaba, which is a town near Mashhad in northeastern Iran. His heritage is actually mixed. He has a Kurdish father and a Persian mother.
Which is an interesting dynamic in itself.
Yeah, it is. But the really defining variable of his life kicks off in 1980 with the outbreak of the Iran-Iraq War. He was only 19 years old, and he joins the Basij paramilitary forces.
Let's actually define what the Basij is, because the translation paramilitary force doesn't quite capture its actual function.
Yeah, what's the nuance there?
So the Basij was established by Ayatollah Khomeini as this massive volunteer civilian militia. It wasn't just a military unit, It was a mechanism for ideological mobilization.
Ah, okay.
So when Ghalibaf joined, he wasn't just enlisting in an army. He was embedding himself in a violently zealous ecosystem. And his initial deployment involved fighting fighting in a brutal domestic counterinsurgency against Kurdish rebels in the West.
Wait, fighting Kurdish rebels?
Yeah.
Even though he has Kurdish heritage from his father.
Exactly. He is fighting a separatist movement that shares his own father's ethnic background. And the sources point out that this immediately establishes a crucial baseline for the regime, right? It proves his loyalty to the Islamic Republic completely supersedes his own bloodlines.
Wow. And that loyalty, I mean, it accelerates his career at a terrifying speed. He moves into the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. By the time he is 22 years old, he is commanding the IRGC's 5th Nasr Division.
At 22, it's hard to even comprehend.
Right. Commanding a division at 22 in one of the most grueling trench warfare conflicts of the 20th century is just hard to fathom. But the UNI report highlights a specific, honestly chilling tactical detail about how he commanded.
Yeah, this part is rough.
It is. During Operation Dawn in 1983, the Nasser troops utilized human wave offensives. And the reports indicate Ghalibaf personally ordered his own soldiers to sweep active minefields with their physical bodies to clear the path for the advance.
Yeah, and to understand that, the tactical reality of the Iran-Iraq War was defined by this severe asymmetry. Iran was facing a heavily armed, Western-backed Iraqi military, and they just lacked equivalent armor and air support.
They didn't have the gear.
Exactly. So the regime's solution was to leverage their demographic advantage through, well, sheer religious martyrdom. From a command perspective, ordering young men, often teenagers from the Basij, to walk into minefields requires a complete detachment from basic human empathy.
It's horrific.
It is, but within the internal logic of the IRGC, this wasn't viewed as a war crime. It was viewed as the ultimate demonstration of ideological purity and strategic resolve. He proved he could operationalize mass death for the state's objectives and do it without flinching.
And that kind of shared trauma, that shared complicity in those trenches, it really seems to be the foundation of his entire political network later on. The sources refer to this group as the Khorasan Circle.
Yeah, because patronage networks in authoritarian regimes function entirely differently than advancement in, say, a Western meritocracy. In a system built on revolutionary ideology, trust is the absolute rarest and most valuable commodity.
Because everyone is watching everyone.
Right. You cannot trust someone just because they have a good resume. You trust them because you bled with them.
That makes sense.
So the Khorasan Circle was this cohort of young commanders from his home province who bonded in that unimaginably brutal environment. This included figures like Qasem Soleimani, who, would go on to build the Quds Force and project Iranian proxy power all across the Middle East.
Right, Abe's name.
And Esmail Ghani as well. But the real linchpin of this entire network was a cleric from Mashhad who frequently visited the 5th Nasr Division on the front lines to just observe these young commanders.
Ali Khamenei.
Yes.
Who, of course, in 1989 becomes the supreme leader of Iran.
And the moment Khamenei ascends to the role of supreme leader, Ghalibaf's trajectory is permanently locked in. Khamenei essentially looks at the men who proved their absolute ruthlessness in the war and decides to install them in the critical nodes of the state apparatus.
To make sure he stays in power.
Exactly, to ensure his own survival. So he appoints Ghalibaf as deputy commander of the Basij, then puts him in charge of the IRGC's massive engineering and construction arm, Khatam al-Anbiya, and eventually, in 1997, makes him the commander of the IRGC Air Force.
So this transition from battlefield commander to domestic enforcer, it brings us to a massive inflection point in 1999. There's this fundamental tension happening in Iran at this time, right?
Definitely, a huge ideological split.
The civilian government is led by a reformist president, Mohammad Khatami. But the military deep state is run by these hardliners like Ghalibaf. So in July 1999, massive student protests erupt at Tehran University.
Which was a major crisis for the regime.
Huge crisis. And we see Ghalibaf, as head of the IRGC Air Force, sign a highly publicized, deeply threatening letter alongside 23 other commanders directed straight at the reformist president.
Yeah, the friction here is really about the core identity of the state. The reformists, like Khatami, were trying to loosen social restrictions and open the country up a bit. But the IRGC viewed any civilian protest not as a domestic dispute, but as a Western-backed existential threat to the revolution.
They saw it as an attack on the system itself.
Exactly. That letter to President Khatami was basically a masterclass in coercion. The military establishment was explicitly stating that if the civilian executive branch did not authorize the violent suppression of these students, the IRGC would bypass the Constitution, step in, and initiate a military coup.
Drawing a massive red line.
They were telling the civilian government, handle this or we take over.
But the sources make it very clear that Ghalibaf didn't just sign a stern piece of paper from a comfortable office.
Hmm.
Years later, a leaked audio recording from 2013 surfaced. I was reading the transcript of this in the Arab Center profile, and it is staggering.
It really is unbelievable to hear a modern official say these things.
Yeah, Ghalibaf is literally bragging to his supporters about his physical involvement in crushing those students. He boasts about being on the back of a motorbike, wielding a wooden club, and personally beating protesters in the street. He calls himself a club-wielder and wears it as a badge of honor.
And, you know, the psychology of that leak is deeply revealing. Because in a Western democracy, a high-ranking military general being caught on tape bragging about acting as a street thug, I mean, that would be a career-ending scandal instantly.
He'd be forced to resign that day.
Without a doubt. But Ghalibaf was speaking to a hardline constituency. In their political ecosystem, being a club wielder, a commodar signifies that you are not some ivory tower intellectual. It proves you are willing to descend into the dirt and physically defend the regime against internal enemies.
So it's a flex for him.
It's a massive flex. He was basically advertising his brutality as his primary qualification for higher office.
And this is the mechanism I really want to unpack because it feels completely counterintuitive. You have a guy doing overt street-level thuggery. He is, for all intents and purposes, the regime's blunt instrument. It's like a mob enforcer suddenly running for mayor.
Right, the optics seem totally wrong.
It's exactly. Yet, immediately after these 1999 protests, Khamenei decides to promote him. In 2000, Khamenei appoints Ghalibaf as the chief of the law enforcement force, the National Police. So how does he make that leap? Why does the supreme leader take a motorcycle-riding club wielder and put him in a tailored suit to run a civilian police force?
Because Khamenei is an incredibly shrewd architect of power. He recognized that the regime had a severe public relations problem on its hands.
Having IRGC generals openly attacking students looks bad.
It looks terrible. It looks like a chaotic, unstable dictatorship. The supreme leader realized that to maintain long-term control, the brutality had to be institutionalized.
Oh, I see.
He needed someone who possessed the absolute unhesitating ruthlessness of a club wielder, but who could wrap that violence in the veneer of a modern functioning bureaucracy. He needed an enforcer capable of building a system where the repression felt like routine law and order.
Which perfectly explains the dual mandate he executes between 2000 and 2005 as police chief. Because reading through his initiatives in the sources, it almost sounds like two different people are running the department.
It really does. It's totally schizophrenic.
Right. On one hand, you have the technocratic reformer. He updates the police fleets with modern vehicles. He launches the Police 110 project, which is essentially their equivalent of a 911 emergency dispatch system in the U.S.
And technocracy, you have to understand, is a highly effective tool for authoritarian consolidation.
How so?
Well, by creating the 110 dispatch system, he made the police genuinely useful to the average citizen for ordinary crimes. Burglaries, traffic accidents, things like that.
So people start to rely on them.
Exactly. It buys public goodwill and projects this image of state competence. When the state provides visible modern services, it implicitly demands compliance in return.
Yeah, but the cost of that compliance becomes violently apparent when you look at his other major initiative during this time, the Moral Security Plan.
The dark side of the coin.
It's exactly. Between 2002 and 2004, while he's out there promoting this shiny new 9/11 system, he is simultaneously executing massive crackdowns on journalists, bloggers, and intellectuals. The sources cite figures like Siamak Porzan, who was thrown into secret detention centers.
Just vanished into black sites?
Right. And Ghalibaf's public justification was that these people were promoting cultural vulgarity. So what does that term actually mean in the context of Iranian law enforcement?
Yeah, cultural vulgarity is a deliberately nebulous, totally weaponized legal concept. In the framework of the Islamic Republic, national security is inseparable from Islamic morality.
They're the same thing.
Exactly. Therefore, a journalist writing an article questioning a theological doctrine or a blogger criticizing state corruption isn't just, expressing an opinion. They are categorized as actively eroding the moral foundation of the state.
Which magically transforms them into a national security threat.
Precisely. Ghalibaf used this framework to transform his modernized police force into an ideological dragnet. He built black sites and utilized specialized interrogation units to dismantle the intellectual opposition, and he did it all under the guise of protecting public morality.
It's incredibly calculated, and the ultimate collision of these two identities, the modern administrator and the brutal enforcer, It happens during the 2003 Tehran University protests.
Yes, the 2003 protests are a defining moment.
Once again, that leaked 2013 audio provides the smoking gun. Ghalibaf talks about his actions during these protests, and he openly admits to bypassing the National Security Council. He says he went into a council meeting, raised hell, and demanded permission to bring his police forces into the university dormitories with lethal intent.
And just to add context, the National Security Council in Iran is designed to be a consensus-building body among the regime's elite to handle crises carefully.
So you aren't supposed to bypass it.
Right. By bypassing it and demanding unilateral lethal authority, Ghalibaf was demonstrating that he viewed bureaucratic deliberation as a total weakness.
And the quote from the sources, which, by the way, was actually corroborated by former President Hassan Rouhani during a later live televised debate, so we know he said it.
Right, on national TV.
Yeah. Ghalibaf explicitly asked for permission to use gas to finish the job. He stated he would crush anyone who came to the dormitories.
He took the ethos of the human wave attacks from the 1980s and just applied it directly to domestic policing. He was essentially telling the political establishment, look, I have built you a modern police force, but do not mistake that for softness. I am still willing to authorize mass casualties against our own youth to maintain order.
It really creates an incredible psychological whiplash with the Iranian public.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine being a citizen there. You have a populace that can call a highly efficient hotline on a Tuesday for a stolen car. But on a Wednesday, that exact same police apparatus is deploying tear gas and live ammunition into a college dormitory.
It's terrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
But from the regime's perspective, this dual capability makes him incredibly valuable. So he decides to parlay these law and order credentials into a presidential run in 2005.
Testing the political waters.
Exactly. Now, he loses to Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, coming in fourth. But in this system, loyalists don't just disappear.
Oh, never. They get reassigned.
Right. He gets a consolation prize.
Yeah.
He's appointed mayor of Tehran. And this kicks off a 12-year era that fundamentally reshapes the capital and exposes a level of corruption that is, frankly, difficult to fully comprehend.
Yeah, the Tehran municipality is an enormous bureaucratic and financial machine. And for Ghalibaf, the mayoral entity was never the endgame. You know, it was basically an extended 12-year audition for the presidency.
He was just biding his time and building his brand.
Exactly. His overarching strategy was to brand himself as a pragmatic conservative. He wanted to contrast himself with the fiery ideological populism of Ahmadinejad. He positioned himself as the guy who doesn't get bogged down in theological debates, but the guy who pours concrete, builds infrastructure, and just gets things done.
And to be fair, the sources acknowledge the concrete. He did massively expand the Tehran metro system. He built parks. He launched monumental infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
And the centerpiece of all this was the Sadr Expressway, which was a massive multi-tiered highway built at an estimated cost of $2.5 billion.
A staggering amount of money.
Right. But the UANI report points out a fascinating detail about this. Independent urban planners analyzed this mega project and concluded that it actually made Tehran's traffic worse. How does a $2.5 billion highway fail at its primary objective?
Well, it fails because its primary objective was actually never traffic management. It was political theater.
Wait, really?
Yeah. In urban planning, there's a well-documented phenomenon called induced demand. When you build massive multi-lane highways, you don't actually relieve congestion, you simply encourage more people to drive, which quickly fills the new capacity and exacerbates the original problem.
Oh, wow. So it just draws more cars to the area.
Exactly. And furthermore, the Sadr Expressway was built in the affluent northern part of Tehran. It was a highly visible vanity project designed to impress the elites, while the working-class southern neighborhoods of the city suffered from severe infrastructural neglect.
It's like building a luxury penthouse on a house with a crumbling foundation. And that structural neglect wasn't just an inconvenience, it became lethal.
The Plasco disaster.
Yes. In January 2017, the Plasco building, which was an iconic 17-story high-rise in central Tehran, caught fire and completely collapsed, killing dozens of firefighters and civilians. And the fallout from this disaster landed squarely on Ghalibaf's desk.
As it should have. The Plasco disaster basically stripped away the entire facade of his competent technocracy. Investigations revealed a catastrophic failure of basic municipal governance. The fire department was drastically underfunded and lacked modern equipment, despite the billions being poured into vanity highways.
While the city also failed to enforce basic fire codes. And his response to the tragedy was incredibly brazen. He went before Parliament, and claimed that his fire department had arrived on the scene in 2.5 minutes, fully equipped and ready.
Which was just not true.
Not at all. The interior minister, who is part of the broader government apparatus, publicly contradicted him. The minister stated that firefighters actually arrived after 5 minutes, realized their equipment was fundamentally broken, had to abandon the scene to retrieve functional gear, and returned 15 minutes later.
It's an unbelievable failure.
And he lied to the legislature about a national tragedy just to protect his brand.
Well, the lie was necessary for him because admitting the truth would expose where the municipality's money was actually going. If the fire department couldn't afford working hoses, it begged the question of what exactly happened to the city's massive budget.
Which brings us directly to the money. The sources refer to this era as the time of the astronomical scandals.
Yeah.
And astronomical really doesn't feel like hyperbole here.
No, the scale of the theft is wild.
Let's look at the mechanism of the first major revelation, the astronomical properties scandal. Investigative journalists uncovered that Ghalibaf's administration had sold over 100,000 square meters of prime municipal real estate at massive discounts, often 50% below market value.
And in a heavily sanctioned economy like Iran's, real estate is one of the most stable and lucrative stores of value. Municipal land isn't just property there, it is a currency used for political patronage.
So he's trading land for loyalty.
Exactly. By transferring public assets at heavily subsidized rates, a mayor can buy the loyalty of city managers, city council members, and influential clerics. He was essentially liquidating the public trust to build a personal political machine.
But the nepotism is what makes it so egregious to me. A significant portion of this wealth, including a direct, unaccounted-for cash payment of 60 billion tomans, was funneled directly into the Imam Reza charity, an organization owned and operated by his own wife, Zahra Sadat Mosher.
Just blatant corruption.
Right. And when a journalist named Yashar Sultani published the documents exposing this, Ghalibaf sued him and had him thrown in prison.
Which, sadly, jailing the journalist is standard operating procedure there. But what is critical to understand here is how the concept of charity is manipulated in this system.
How does that work?
In Iran, massive religious endowments and charities, which are known as bonyads, operate completely outside of standard taxation and government oversight.
So they are totally unregulated.
Completely.
Yeah.
So transferring municipal funds into a private charity controlled by a spouse is a highly sophisticated mechanism for laundering public money into untraceable private wealth, all while maintaining an outward appearance of religious piety.
Wow. And yet, as massive as the astronomical property scandal was, it is entirely eclipsed by the Yas Holding Company case. This involves the military economic complex. What exactly was Yas Holding, and how does $3 billion just vanish?
Yeah, to understand Yas Holding, you have to understand that the IRGC is not just a military force.
Right, they do a lot more than just security.
Oh, much more. It is a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar corporate conglomerate that controls vast sectors of the Iranian economy. Yas Holding was a subsidiary of the IRGC's Cooperative Foundation. It operated as an engineering and financial firm.
Okay.
So the municipality of Tehran, under Ghalibaf, awarded massive, unbid infrastructure contracts to Yas Holding, and the firm systematically overcharged the city, failed to deliver on projects, and embezzled roughly 13 trillion tomans, which was equivalent to about $3 billion at the time.
$3 billion stolen from the city budget by a military front company. How did Ghalibaf react when this theft was discovered internally?
We know exactly what he did because, once again, a leaked audio recording exposed the internal mechanics of the regime.
Another leak.
Yeah. In 2022, Radio Farda published a highly classified audio tape of the former IRGC commander Mohammad Ali Jafari discussing the fallout. The tape reveals that when the massive hole in the finances was discovered, Ghalibaf did not call for an investigation. Instead, he actively conspired to cover it up.
He went to Hossein Taib, right? The notoriously powerful and feared head of the IRGC's intelligence organization. The mayor of the capital city and the head of military intelligence literally conspired to forge memorandums and cook the books to hide the missing $3 billion.
It demonstrates the absolute fusion of municipal corruption and military power. The IRGC needed that capital to fund its regional operations and internal patronage networks, and Ghalibaf facilitated the extraction of that wealth right from the citizens of Tehran.
But Parliament actually tried to do its job, didn't they? In 2016, members of Parliament pushed for a formal inquiry into the Tehran municipality's finances. And this is where we see the most staggering mechanism of survival.
Oh, this part is just brazen.
A conservative MP, Mustafa Mirsalem, publicly claimed and even submitted documents to the judiciary that Ghalibaf deployed a massive bribery operation to kill the investigation.
He essentially bought the legislature. The allegations state that he distributed 65 billion tomans, approximately $22 million in bribes, to key members of parliament to ensure they voted against the inquiry.
I really want the listener to just pause and process this sequence of events for a second. It's a lot to take in. It is. He pays a $22 million bribe to lawmakers to successfully stop them from investigating a $3 billion theft by a military intelligence front company, while simultaneously funneling public land to his wife's charity. In any functional legal system on the planet, this individual goes to prison for the rest of his life. How does he avoid a jail cell?
This brings us to a crucial metaphor for understanding the Iranian system. Think of the regime's power structure as a deeply compromised, condemned building.
Okay, I'm visualizing it.
Ghalibaf is not just a fixture in that building. He is a load-bearing pillar. He is structurally integrated into the IRGC's financial networks, the Supreme Leader's patronage system, and the security apparatus.
So you pull him out.
Exactly. If the judiciary were to aggressively prosecute Ghalibaf for the Yas holding scandal, they would have to expose the entire financial rot of the Revolutionary Guards. Khamenei values systemic stability and the illusion of revolutionary purity far more than he values actual anti-corruption. In fact, reports indicate that when the public pressure peaked, Ghalibaf actually offered to resign as mayor, but Khamenei explicitly blocked him.
He wouldn't let him quit.
No. The Supreme Leader determined that allowing a high-profile resignation over corruption would be far more damaging to the regime's domestic legitimacy than simply suppressing the scandal.
He is literally too corrupt to fail.
Right.
His survival is guaranteed because his downfall would take the whole system with him. But, that level of absolute immunity creates a massive psychological blind spot.
Oh, absolutely. Hubris sets in.
Right. He begins to believe his own myth. He thinks he's untouchable. And that arrogance leads directly to the public relations disaster that totally obliterates his carefully curated political brand.
Which brings us to his perennial quest for the presidency and the supreme hypocrisy of his populist messaging.
Because Ghalibaf is relentless. He ran for president in 2005, 2013, 2017, and 2024. Every single time, he either loses at the ballot box or is forced by the regime's internal consensus to withdraw in favor of another candidate.
He's the ultimate bridesmaid of Iranian politics.
Exactly. So let's examine the narrative he tries to sell to the voters during these campaigns. Who is the character he's playing?
He plays the role of the working-class hero who understands modern management. He frequently wore a leather jacket on the campaign trail to look relatable. His primary rhetoric was this blistering attack on what he called the 4%.
The 4%.
Yeah, the ultra-wealthy, corrupt elites who he claimed were leeching off the country while the remaining 96% of everyday Iranians suffered under crippling international sanctions and economic mismanagement. He presented himself as the antidote to elite privilege.
Which perfectly sets the stage for what happened in April 2022. The Iranian economy is in absolute free fall at this point. Inflation is skyrocketing, basic food staples are becoming unaffordable, and the working class is just being crushed.
It was a very dark time economically.
Right in the middle of this intense national suffering, photos leak on Twitter showing Ghalibaf's family, his wife, his daughter, and his son-in-law at Tehran's international airport.
Yeah, they were returning from a trip to Istanbul, Turkey, and the visual evidence was damning.
What were they doing?
They weren't just taking a vacation. They were caught returning with 20 pieces of oversized luggage packed with high-end luxury baby items. They had traveled to a foreign country specifically to buy a complete designer layette for his daughter's unborn child.
And the scandal immediately gets dubbed Sismunigate, or Layette Gate. The Iranian public absolutely exploded. You have citizens who literally cannot afford bread watching the Speaker of Parliament's family haul 20 suitcases of foreign luxury goods through the airport.
The contrast couldn't be worse.
And the irony is so thick it is almost cinematic. During the 2017 presidential debates, Ghalibaf had gone on live national television and viciously attacked a rival cabinet minister for allegedly traveling to Italy to buy baby clothes.
Yes, I remember that.
He used that exact scenario as absolute proof that the establishment was morally bankrupt and disconnected from the poor.
And then his family does the exact same thing, but on a much larger scale. The hypocrisy was structural and undeniable. He had weaponized the austerity of the Iranian people for his own political gain, while privately ensuring his family lived as untouchable aristocrats. It laid bare the central lie of his entire political persona.
And independent journalists didn't stop at the baby clothes. Once the thread was pulled, the entire financial tapestry of his family started to unravel. What else did they find in Turkey?
Well, they uncovered that his wife, daughter, and son-in-law had recently purchased 2 luxury apartments in an exclusive high-end complex in Istanbul.
How much did that cost?
They paid roughly $1.6 million.
$1.6 million in foreign real estate on a public servant's salary. And then there's the revelation that feels like the ultimate betrayal of the regime's core ideology.
Yeah, this part is incredible. It was discovered that Ghalibaf's son, Isha, had applied for permanent residency in Canada. Yes, Canada. He reportedly submitted financial documents claiming to possess hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid funds to support his application to immigrate to North America.
The son of the man who built his career on revolutionary zeal, who commands forces that literally chant death to America and its allies, is actively trying to move to a Western G7 nation.
It perfectly illustrates the cynicism of the Iranian elite. The anti-Western ideology is strictly for domestic consumption and maintaining control over the populace. But privately, the elite view the West as a safe haven to park their wealth and secure exit strategies for their children.
That is just so cynical.
And by the way, the Canadian government eventually intervened. In February 2024, the Canadian Minister of Immigration publicly announced that Isha Ghalibaf's visa application was explicitly denied, citing the Iranian regime's gross human rights violations and engagement in terrorism.
Wow. Okay, so let's tally the damage here. His populist image is incinerated. The general public despises him for his hypocrisy, the theological hardliners distrust his ideological purity, and his astronomical corruption is documented in international news.
Right, he's radioactive.
By any standard metric of political gravity, his career should be a smoldering crater. Yet, in 2020, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf is elected Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, and he maintains that position today. How does a deeply unpopular, thoroughly exposed politician capture the head of the legislature?
Because public popularity is practically irrelevant in the Iranian parliamentary system. Elections are heavily engineered by the Guardian Council, which disqualifies any genuine opposition from even running.
So the game is rigged before it starts.
Exactly. And once inside the parliament, power is secured through ruthless backroom maneuvering. Ghalibaf secured the speakership by making a pact with the very people who should despise him. The ultra-hardline factions, specifically a group known as the Pidari Front.
Wait, how does that alliance work logically? Why would religious zealots align with a corrupt pragmatist?
It is a purely transactional marriage of convenience. The Pidari Front has deep ideological zeal, but they lack executive competence and broad institutional connections.
Ah, I see.
Ghalibaf has no fixed ideology, but he has the money, the IRGC networks, and the bureaucratic ruthlessness they need. He traded them control over key, influential parliamentary committees in exchange for their votes to make him speaker. He is a chameleon. He adopts whatever posture is necessary to service the power structure in the immediate moment.
Which brings us to the present reality. It is April 2026, and the environment he is operating in has fundamentally transformed. Since late February, a massive multi-front regional war, what the U.S. has designated Operation Epic Fury, has broken out involving the United States, Israel, and Iran.
And the scale of this conflict has reshuffled the entire deck of power in Tehran. The U.S. and Israeli militaries have executed an unprecedented campaign of targeted decapitation strikes against the regime's upper echelon.
Yeah, according to the cross-reference reports from the Jerusalem Post and the Soufan Center, the damage to the Iranian leadership is staggering. The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was reportedly killed. Ali Larijani, the veteran politician who headed the Supreme National Security Council, was assassinated. The top ranks of the IRGC command structure have been decimated. The state is facing a massive power vacuum.
And in the chaos of those assassinations, Ghalibaf has stepped into the breach. The sources indicate that he has quietly assumed absolute responsibility for the regime's strategic decision-making.
So he's running the show.
Essentially, yes. He is currently operating as a de facto co-leader, working in tandem with Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the late supreme leader, who controls the clerical and intelligence apparatus behind the scenes.
So the guy who beats students with a club, the mayor who covered up a $3 billion theft, the disgraced populist with the luxury baby clothes, is now the man managing a catastrophic regional war.
He is the last load-bearing pillar standing. while the newly elected President Pezeshkian handles the day-to-day civilian administration, and General Vahidi manages the tactical military survival, Ghalibaf is the strategic anchor. Analysts refer to him as the manager of the regime's networked survival machine.
That's a great phrase.
It fits perfectly. His entire life has been training for how to operate without morals, relying purely on leverage in order to survive.
And we are seeing him apply that cynical, highly pragmatic leverage in real time. There is a specific detail in the Republic World Report that perfectly encapsulates his mindset. It involves his interaction with the U.S. stock market.
Oh, this is one of the most surreal dynamics of this entire conflict.
Right. Recently, President Trump posted on his platform, Truth Social, stating that backdoor talks with Iran were going well and implying that he was pausing planned military strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure.
Trying to calm things down.
Yeah. And the reaction on Wall Street was instantaneous. The U.S. stock market rallied and global oil prices stabilized. The financial markets are desperate for de-escalation. So how does Ghalibaf respond to the President of the United States trying to calm the markets? He logs on to X, formerly Twitter, and literally dispenses cynical investment advice to day traders.
It's just wild.
He posts, and I quote, "If they pump it, short it. If they dump it, go long."
It is an astounding piece of psychological warfare. He is directly communicating with Western financial capital.
He explicitly tells the financial world that U.S. statements of de-escalation are nothing more than setups for profit-taking and hold no strategic truth. He is telling Wall Street not to buy the rally because the war is not over.
He's stoking the panic.
He even goes so far as to threaten institutional investors, stating that anyone buying U.S. Treasury bonds is actively financing military strikes on Iran. He is using his Twitter account to play the U.S. stock market with the threat of geopolitical violence.
Yeah.
What is the mechanism behind this strategy?
He deeply understands the political vulnerabilities of Western democracies. He knows that the American administration is hypersensitive to domestic economic indicators, specifically gas prices, inflation, and the stock market.
Right, because of elections.
Exactly. Unlike Iran, where the regime can violently crush domestic dissent over economic hardship, a U.S. president can lose an election over $6 a gallon gasoline. Ghalibaf is weaponizing the global economy, trying to create so much financial pain and uncertainty in the West that Washington is forced to back down.
Which brings us to the actual negotiating table. Today is April 11th, 2026. Direct, high-level ceasefire talks are currently underway in Islamabad, Pakistan.
And Ghalibaf is no longer operating in the shadows. He has flown to Islamabad to personally lead the Iranian delegation. He is sitting face-to-face with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance.
So let's examine what Ghalibaf is actually demanding here. We know from the intelligence leaks analyzed by the Soufan Center that the Iranian delegation has submitted a comprehensive 10-point plan.
And the 10-point plan is a fascinating document. It is essentially a roadmap for regime survival, but it is aggressively packaged as a strategic victory.
How does he spin that?
You have to remember the context here. Iran has absorbed over 13,000 military strikes. Their air defenses are shattered, their infrastructure is heavily damaged. But Ghalibaf's internal political calculus dictates that simply surviving the onslaught must be framed to his base as a triumph over the West.
So what does a victorious peace deal look like to him? The most controversial elements revolve around the Strait of Hormuz, right? This is the maritime choke point where roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through.
Right. Ghalibaf is demanding that the international community, and specifically the U.S., tacitly recognize Iranian hegemony over the strait. His most brazen demand is the implementation of a massive transit fee.
A toll booth.
A very expensive toll booth. He wants to charge $2 million for every single commercial ship that passes through the strait, proposing to share this revenue with neighboring Oman.
$2 million per ship in international waters. That is state-sanctioned extortion on a global scale.
Well, under international maritime law, you obviously cannot charge transit fees for ships passing through an international strait. But Ghalibaf doesn't care about maritime law, he cares about leverage. He wants to transform the Strait of Hormuz from a strategic military choke point into a massive mandatory toll booth to fund the reconstruction of his damaged regime.
It's an insane demand.
And what is truly wild is that President Trump, during a recent press conference, surprisingly floated the idea of forming a joint venture with Iran to manage the strait.
So Ghalibaf throws out an outrageous extortion demand, and the U.S. president signals that it might actually be a negotiable business arrangement. Ghalibaf sees the opening and pushes further. What else is he demanding in this 10-point plan?
He is demanding a permanent, binding end to all hostilities, not just a temporary pause, but a guarantee that the U.S. will not strike again. He is demanding comprehensive, immediate relief from all economic sanctions. And crucially, he absolutely refuses to concede Iran's core strategic assets. He will not surrender their right to enrich uranium, and he will not dismantle their ballistic missile program.
So, to summarize his negotiating position, his country has been heavily bombed, yet he's demanding total sanctions relief, a multi-million-dollar extortion fee on global shipping, and he is offering zero concessions on their nuclear or missile programs.
He wants everything.
And he's willing to give up almost nothing.
Exactly. And he is maintaining this hardline stance while navigating immense, potentially lethal pressure back home in Tehran. The political factions are just tearing each other apart. Hardline ideologues, represented by influential outlets like the Kayhan newspaper, are furious that Ghalibaf is even sitting in the same room as the Americans.
They want to keep fighting.
They demand war until victory and view any negotiation as treason. But on the other end of the spectrum, pragmatic diplomats like former Foreign Minister Javad Zarif are desperately warning that if Ghalibaf miscalculates and prolongs this war, the U.S. will turn Iran's infrastructure to ash.
He is walking a tightrope over an active volcano. But let's look at the underlying logic of his gamble. Ghalibaf is calculating that the United States has reached the limit of its risk tolerance, right?
That's his bet.
He is betting that the U.S. administration will not pull the trigger on a wider regime change war because they fear the catastrophic economic fallout, the inflation spikes, the market crashes, the disruption of global energy supplies. He's playing an enormous game of strategic chicken with the global economy.
And the American delegation, led by Vice President Vance, is playing the exact same game from the opposite side. The U.S. position, according to the sources, is that without verifiable nuclear concessions and the complete cessation of Iranian support for proxy militias across the Middle East, there will be no deal, and the bombing campaign will resume with even greater intensity.
It's a total standoff.
A standoff where the slightest miscalculation by either side leads to an uncontrollable regional conflagration.
Which means the man holding the steering wheel for Iran in this moment of ultimate crisis is a man who has spent 40 years learning how to outmaneuver every single enemy he has ever faced, both domestic and foreign.
Yeah, that's exactly where we are.
Let's pull all of these threads together. We set out today to investigate the biography of Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. And what we've uncovered is a portrait of the ultimate political chameleon.
He is a man constructed entirely of contradictions, yet unified by a singular drive for survival.
He is a brutal military enforcer who rode motorcycles with wooden clubs to beat college students in the streets. He is a mayor who built massive expressways to project modern competence, while simultaneously conspiring to cover up billions of dollars stolen by military intelligence fronts.
Right.
He is a populist who built a brand screaming about the corrupt elites, while his own family hauled luxury baby clothes from Turkey and bought multi-million-dollar real estate in Istanbul. And today, he is the pragmatic, tailored face of an authoritarian regime sitting in Islamabad, trying to negotiate the survival of his state on the world stage.
Because he's not driven by pure religious dogma, he is driven by a cold, calculating understanding of the mechanics of control. He understands the language of power, leverage, and systemic corruption better than anyone left alive in the Iranian establishment.
And that is exactly why his biography matters to you, the listener. When you open your news app tomorrow and see a headline about the ceasefire talks in Pakistan stalling, or when you check your portfolio and see the market swinging wildly based on rumors of Middle East escalation, you are watching the direct, real-time result of Ghalibaf's unique blend of military ruthlessness and cynical pragmatism.
Absolutely. The decisions he is making on that table right now will ripple through the global economy and permanently alter the geopolitical map for a generation.
He is deeply complicit in the architecture of the current crisis, and he has positioned himself as the indispensable architect of his resolution.
He made himself the only option.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought. We started this deep dive noting how we usually expect political careers to follow a logical, meritocratic progression. But as we look back at the labyrinth of Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf's life, I want you to mull over this question. In a highly volatile authoritarian system, a regime where the absolute purity of religious ideology is supposedly the highest possible virtue. How does a man with such transparent, highly publicized corruption, such blatant and well-documented hypocrisy, become the ultimate survivor?
It's the ultimate paradox.
Perhaps his life suggests a much darker truth about the nature of the state. In the dark architecture of absolute power, ruthless loyalty and the sheer cynical ability to maintain the network survival machine are far more valuable currencies than ideological purity, honesty, or public popularity. The blueprint of power isn't about upholding ideals. It's about being the one person willing to do whatever it takes, no matter how brutal or corrupt, to keep the condemned building from falling down.